Hi, I'm April Smith from performingineducation.com, and today we're talking about how to assess project-based learning. So I get a lot of emails from teachers asking, how do I actually assess what students are learning within the project-based learning activity, and how does that make it to my gradebook? So project-based learning, we know, is a great way to teach students the standards through actual project-based activities. And so the assessment might look a little bit different, but what I'm going to do in this video is show you how we can relate the assessment to some current assessment methods that you already know about, so that this isn't a huge change for you in your classroom. And we're going to be taking a look mainly at rubrics and how we use rubrics within project-based learning activities to assess not just the final product, but the process of the project-based learning activity. So keep watching for the training, and I will also provide you with a link to a free rubric for you to use either as a project-based learning activities generic rubric or just as an example to take a look. So the focus of this training is how to evaluate project-based learning. And so a little bit about me. My name again is April Smith, and I implemented project-based learning in my classroom for a very long time before recently when I started working with teachers and districts to help them learn how to properly implement project-based learning. Project-based learning is something that is really not as hard as it seems, but it can be very scary for teachers. And so what I do is I walk teachers through step by step how to implement it. I show them how it is similar to what they've already been doing in their classroom so that that fear is no longer there. If you have not watched my basics video on project-based learning and you want to learn more about how PBL is implemented and what it is, please check that out in my YouTube channel. It's definitely a good first video to start with if you're new to project-based learning. If you are planning your first project-based learning activity or you already use it in your classroom and you're just looking for information on how to assess our project-based learning activities, then this is the right video for you. And let's get started. So first of all, with evaluation, we have some basic things that need to happen. First of all, your system should evaluate each individual child. So even though your students will be doing a lot of collaboration and they may actually work with a group or a partner the entire time, whatever evaluation system you have has to evaluate the individual child. We do not give one grade to an entire group. That is not how project-based learning works. So we'll keep that in mind when you're evaluating, that it is to evaluate each individual child in a way that's fair. Connected to that, whatever evaluation system you're using should be kid-friendly and transparent. Your students should understand what's expected before they begin and how they will be evaluated, and it needs to just be very easy for them to understand. It also should be accessible, so if you are using a rubric or something similar, make sure that students have access to that throughout the project. It also has to be open-ended to allow for a variety of different products. You want your students to come up with different ideas, and in order to do that, you have to leave it open-ended. So you cannot evaluate your students based off of students completing a poster or a website or one end product, because if you do, that's the only end product they can create, and that defeats the purpose of having the choice and voice within project-based learning. And the last thing is the evaluation should assess the entire process, not just the end result. So many teachers are concerned that they are working on a project for 3 weeks and they have one grade to put in their gradebook. Well, that's not the case. Whatever system you create, you have to be able to evaluate the entire process. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna look at the system that I use, which is a rubric system, which is very popular for evaluating project-based learning, and how to use that rubric to evaluate the entire process instead of just that end result, which is what we're kind of used to making rubrics for. So let's take a look at a specific rubric that I use for an ELA project, which is based around character traits and the book Wonder. So the first thing that you'll notice is I have a 1 to 4 scale. You can use whatever scale you normally use in rubrics. Some places do 1 to 3, some do 1 to 5, whatever is appropriate. In this case, the 4 means exceeding, the 3 means meeting the standard, 2 means approaching, and 1 means falls far below. And to me, in a rubric, 1 means that there's really just no attempt to complete the work. So if you look at this rubric, the first thing that is a big piece of any project-based learning activity is in-depth inquiry. So I have a section on the rubric for the research and information gathering. So within this project, the students learn about character traits through in-depth inquiry. And so this is where I'm giving them a grade for that specific work. Now, although they're discussing and they're reading within small groups, they are each graded for the notes that they take, and a lot of times students will go above and beyond by researching at home or just doing extra research that they need to understand the topic. And so to me, that's what I include in the 4 as exceeding. So the next thing that we have on our rubric is a big piece of project-based learning, which is the planning and critical thinking. So instead of grading students on each step that they did within the project, since many of them will do each step a little differently, we grade them on the planning and the critical thinking skills they use within the project. So each step of the way, the student has to make some sort of decision or make a choice. Those choices have to be logical and based on their research in order for them to score high on this piece of the rubric. And the last piece of the rubric, this is actually a very condensed rubric. Some of mine have 4 or 5 categories, but in this case, this is a very short rubric, and I've skipped the rubric piece that goes with the book, since that's more reading and book-based than project-based. But for this project, students were tasked with making an interactive display that we put together as an entire class display to teach students about the book and character traits. And so they were not given any directions on what an interactive display should look like, so all projects are essentially different in the end result. So this leaves it very open-ended. To get a 4, they have to create something innovative. It has to be something that's different from what other students come up with. It's very hands-on. It shows and highlights the character trait and the event really well, and they just do an exceptional job at creating something innovative. And then for a 3, it's an interesting interactive display, but not anything necessarily innovative. So we always want to push students towards the innovative side. So let's talk about the gradebook. So if you have a rubric that has 5 different sections or 3 different sections or 10 different sections, how do you input that into the gradebook? I get a lot of people asking me, do I give a grade for each section that goes into the gradebook separately? My answer is always this. You need to put it in the gradebook depending on what works best for you, your students, and your school. So if your school wants a grade for ELA every week, 1 grade a week, and they have set that in there, then that's something you're going to have to use the rubric to create a grade every week. However, if your school is more relaxed about it, what I would suggest is having a score for each section of the rubric. If, like I said, your school wants a grade for every section, let's look back at this one, or every week, and you're like, well, it took us 2 weeks to do research. That's okay. You can input 2 separate grades for just this portion of the rubric, if that makes sense. So let's say the first week you've got a student who just is putting very little effort, they seem very lost, and they get a 1 or a 2. Well, the next week they pick up and they're doing a little bit better. They've learned some strategies. They're still new to project-based learning, but they're getting better, and they get a 3. So that could be 2 separate grades that you put in the grade book, 1 for 1 week and 1 for the next. If that's what your school wants you to do, if you have to have a weekly grade. What I prefer to do is to look at the student overall, each individual student, and look at where they ended up. So if they started kind of slow and they need a little bit of help, especially if it's their first PBL, then I'm more likely to be grading towards the end of the research where they ended up. So that is my recommendation for the gradebook. And like I said, though, it is going to be individual to whatever works best for you personally. I know we like to hear, do exactly this, but that's not always the case because our schools and our classrooms work so differently. So definitely, I recommend using a rubric similar to the one I showed you. If you have other skills that you want students to work on, such as written skills, that is often included in the rubric as well. In fact, this is my only rubric that didn't have a writing skill built in because I really had a big focus on the character trait piece. So anything written you can add in there. If you want them to do some sort of presentation, if that fits well into your project, then include a oral presentation as part of the rubric. You can include anything that you want your students to do from the start to finish in the rubric in a separate piece. Okay, so I have a free resource that you can download that gives a very generic project-based learning rubric just to try with your class. It should go with pretty much anything that you use that's project-based learning in your classroom, and you can make a few tweaks just to make it work a little better, and I will link to that. If you have started project-based learning or you're looking into it and you need a way to plan it and keep the information organized and make sure you're including all of the important ingredients of project-based learning, please check out my planning guide. It's at performingineducation.com/planning guide, no spaces, no dashes. This is a great tool that over 15,000 teachers have downloaded to plan project-based learning in their classroom, and it's free. And if you want a little more support and you want to be walked through everything step by step in a way that's easy to understand, check out my Implement Project-Based Learning from Start to Finish course. It is a professional development course worth 8 credit hours. It is completely online and self-paced. You get specific feedback from me and a private Facebook group. And it is a great deal. It is very affordable. And you can find that at aprilsmith.teachable.com. Or you can go to performingineducation.com/courses. And of course, you can find more information about project-based learning on my blog, performingineducation.com. Thank you so much for joining me for this training today. I hope that this helped you look at how to evaluate project-based learning using rubrics. And remember that the way that you will put this in your gradebook is the way that works best for you when you're converting rubric scores into your gradebook. But since you have several different categories for the entire process, you will have several different grades for your gradebooks, which is awesome. So hopefully this helped you out. Please come join us in our Facebook group, Planning and Implementing Project-Based Learning, and we will talk more in there.